we hear a lot about disruption, right? People say, oh, this is disruptive. What if the disruption already happened? What if the day that ChatGPT came out, that was the disruption? That was the earthquake. And now we're just living in integration time. And so the question is, how fast can you adapt to a new world? It doesn't matter how good Sora's model is. It doesn't matter if ChatGPT 12 does 18 million more things. If you haven't figured it out by now that the world changed 4 years ago, you're probably on a treadmill that's going to be very difficult to catch up. And
At Elements of Culture, we sit down with experts in leadership and team building to explore the DNA that drives a thriving organization. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Elements of Culture. My name is Taryn, and I'm joined with my co-host, Julie. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Marc Sirkin. He is the founder of Marc Sirkin Consulting and a recent, yes, woo, he is the recent graduate from CEO back to consulting. So, Marc, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today.
thanks so much for having me. It's great to meet you guys.
Great meeting you too. I'm excited for this conversation. You have an extensive background in marketing and tech, and you worked across a number of companies, whether it be small, large, public, private, non-profit sectors as well. And so I think that you're just going to bring a unique set of experience and thought process to this conversation. But before we dive into some of the topics, tell us a little bit, about your background and more specifically, and also maybe why you decided to kind of launch back into the consulting space again.
Yeah, no, I like to say I have a really weird career. I mean, I think a lot of us have had weird careers. It's weird times. My first internet job was 90, 93, 94. And so I was in really, really early, and I didn't know what it was going to be at the time, but it was kind of mind blowing what was going on. And through those early years, really understanding how radical the commercial internet was through, like I like to tell a kind of story where in 93, 94, no one knew why you needed a website, but by 98, 99, you really didn't have a business unless you had one. It was a very compressed time frame. And I think we're in a similar disruptive moment, transformational moment with AI. It's like AI kind of felt like a tool a couple of years ago, and now all of a sudden it feels less and less like a tool and more like something really important that I need to know how to use, at least understand. And so I did the startup thing. I worked in internet companies and had a really incredible ride. And I kind of got burned out, to be honest. It's happened to me a couple times in my life. I just hard charge at lots of things. I can't help it. It's just built that way. And so I took an entire right turn. I spent the next 10 years, basically 10 years working in nonprofits. I spent time at like really large health charities, March Dimes, Leukemia Lymphoma Society, Autism Speaks, and a couple others. And I really was able to bring kind of that internet hard charging idealism and ideas to those cultures, which were not really ready for the internet. And I'm not entirely sure they are today in some cases, but they've gotten better. And so that was a really interesting ride. I ended up at PwC, which is where I cut my teeth in consulting, even though I had kind of already been doing internal consulting all along. I just didn't know what to call it. And so I did a couple of years at PwC, and I eventually ended up at this small media company called Third Door Media. They run Search Engine Land and Martec, and they run some conferences. And I just loved it. I had never stayed anywhere longer than 3 or 4 years. I ended up there almost 10 years, rose to president. When we sold the company to Semrush a year ago, I became CEO of the division. And I ran that for a year, did the transition, and ultimately came to this insane decision. I mean, it's not insane. This decision to go back on my own and create my own consulting firm so that I could kind of clear up some space in my head to do the kinds of things that you just don't have time to do when you're running a division of a public company.
Yeah, that's so good. So it's kind of like you're taking all of your experience from the different places, and now you're going to have a little more time to execute on the projects and passions that you have. And I really think we all have something to learn from your story here, because we get so busy. We get so tied up with the day-to-day things that are we really being productive to the things that are our personal passions?
Yeah.
We have to work. Yes, there's a balance, but at the same time, I think sometimes we don't give enough room for those passions to really grow and to turn into something.
Yeah. And I mean, I had a realization. I had a coach years ago, and I remember saying to her, I don't feel creative, or I don't feel like I can express myself creatively. And it wasn't true. I was actually wrong about that. I was expressing myself creatively through the lens of marketing and through the projects that I was working on. And I think anybody you talk to would say, yeah, Sirkin's a pretty creative guy. What I didn't realize until much later, until frankly, like earlier this year, was, oh my God, I had been spending all my creative energy on those projects that were not my projects. They were their projects. They were important. And we were driving the business forward and doing all great stuff. but I just really was like, oh my God, I have no headspace for my own stuff. And I'll tell you, COVID actually was horrible for all the reasons it was horrible, except for one reason for me, which was I had time. I suddenly had time. I literally wrote a screenplay and two novels in that COVID time. And like, where'd that come from? And I realized it was time. I had time to think and to apply this limited amount of creativity. I don't really think, I think you probably have a limit, right? Like we all have a certain number of words we can speak in a day, and then it's like I just can't speak anymore. I think creativity is probably the same way. It's not an infinite well. And so when I find myself spending all that creative energy focused on external things, my job, my work, or whatever, it just wasn't leaving me enough space. And so I'm hoping that this move will give me some space to really think about the book I want to write and consulting projects and the types of projects I want to do and the kinds of people that I want to work with. So we'll see if that works out.
Well, talk to me, Mark, a little bit about like you're back in the consulting space. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing. There was obviously a draw where you saw that clients are needing something. You can fill that void. What are you really targeting here? How are you going to help these people? And what do you think some companies currently, what you're seeing, are having difficulty with?
I'm not entirely sure where to start because that's a really big ocean of a question that you just asked me. So let me try to break it down into a couple of different chunks. One is I think that the rise of AI has given some people, not everybody, some executives, a false sense of what it is. They don't totally understand it. And it can feel like magic, right? The first time you use ChatGPT, it answers you in a question. You're like, oh my God, this is actually magic, right? The first time you use Midjourney, you're like, did it? I don't know if you guys are on Sora 2 yet, but I'm like addicted to Sora 2 now. And it's like, I can't believe what I'm seeing happening. That doesn't mean you understand how to apply it. It just means it's a piece of technology, which is true of all technologies. And so I think the first thing is that I've spent the time to understand how you apply these technologies the same way you apply any disruptive or transformative technology. It's not magic. There's no magic to it. There's process change and change management, and there's something called, I don't know if you have heard about Martec's law. Martec's law is basically this concept that technology changes exponentially, but people don't effectively, right? And so we just have we have a limited amount of stuff we can change about ourselves and our organizations, and we can do a lot of change over time, but maybe not immediately. And so here comes ChatGPT and LLMs and AI and agents. We had this big announcement yesterday. You can't absorb it all. It's not possible. And not only can you as an individual not absorb it all, or your organization can't absorb it all. So I have a perspective on that I think could be helpful for some organizations that kind of are in this interesting 2x2. I'll be a consultant for a minute. I draw a 2x2. I'm like, one axis is, do I believe AI is truly transformative, or do I believe it's nothing, not important? And then the second is, do I think that my business is existentially going to be impacted by these technologies? If you're somewhere in the zone of yes and yes, you probably want to talk to me. All right. As I believe that's true for most every business. I'm sure there's some exceptions. And so I'm really just trying to figure out, how to loan my expertise and my perspective to companies that are struggling with this, because I think a lot of people are. And I don't think that there's answers. There's just decisions to be made, and essential decisions that have to be made about your team, how literate you are as an executive, how you think about change management, and ultimately, how do you apply something like AI to a change problem is, I think, going to impact every business on the planet over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. So, Mark, Taryn and I have been having a lot of conversations with executives, and we hear the hesitation and we hear questions like, where do you start? Is it too soon? How do I get my team on board? How do I get them to? Because I think there's a lot of information out there, whether it's accurate or not. A lot of them think they're going to be replaced. Is it going to really help? Is it going to be productive? Is it worth the money that we're spending? And so there's a lot of questions. So I think you've nailed it on the head. And we're feeling that we do have the group of people that are like, I want all of it. I don't know what it looks like, but I want all of it. And so we have seen that. So I definitely think there is a space for that. I think AI change management is going to be something in the future. We had spoken to another leader maybe a couple weeks ago, and she said, for those who don't jump on AI or even somewhat embrace it, they're probably going to be, paying McKinsey a lot of money in the future to get caught up, And so I think no shot at McKinsey here, but I'm just saying, like, I think there's absolutely a need, and we are definitely seeing it. And so, I guess my next question would be: is why do you think there is the hesitation? Where do you think that resistance is coming from?
Yeah, you ask good questions. It's going to be different for different businesses and different, like you again. I'll be a consultant for a minute. Like every business has some kind of multiple maturity models that they operate within, and they may know it or not. But like if you look at AI adoption, you sort of go from relatively immature. We're not really using it that much to, we've deeply baked it into everything just to oversimplify the framework. And you apply that to everything, operations, HR, finance. There's nothing you can't apply a basic maturity model to. And by the way, organizations are everywhere on those spectrums, depending on what kind of organization, what kind of leader, who the leader was. Like if the CEO is a marketing person versus an ops person, it can look very different. And so I think that's the first thing, is that all organizations live somewhere on these spectrums. I think that the media has not helped us in this sense, right? I think the message that a lot of us are receiving is, AI automation is going to replace jobs, and it probably will. I don't see how it doesn't, but that doesn't mean that you just sort of lay down and go, okay, I guess my job is, I don't think that that's actually what's going to happen. And I think you look to history to understand what happened when the printing press was invented and when the example that I always use, because I lived it, was 394 through 98 to 2000, 2001. Forget the financial markets, because there was a bubble similar to what we have happening now, probably, although it's not financial advice. I don't know if we're in an AI bubble or not, but it feels like we might be. And the only reason I say that is in 93, 94, 95, I think we were talking about this before we started recording, like most businesses didn't know why they needed a website in the first place. Like, why in the heck do I need a website? Today, you take that for granted. But it was a very, very small window of time between like 93, 94 to like maybe 98, 99. By 99, 2000, you weren't a real business at any scale without a website, right? I mean, there's lots of small businesses that don't have websites, don't need websites, but I'm talking about mid-market enterprise. You have to have a website. You have to have a web presence. You have to do SEO. You have to do all the things so that you can do internet stuff. That's the world runs on internet stuff. And so I suspect that we're in that exact moment today. The difference, as it's been pointed out to me and as I've observed on my own, is the time compression here is really whacked. Like it is nothing we've ever seen. I believe it's 800 million weekly ChatGPT users. That is the fastest consumer adoption app in the history of mankind. Nothing's even close. And so everything's getting compressed and everything's getting much more complicated. Yesterday they announced an agent builder and they announced API access and Sora 2, all this just this week. And so it's impossible to keep up. And I think that's the other part to your question. Why are people maybe hesitating? It's impossible to keep up. It is a full-time job to keeping up with this stuff. And you need to be discerning about kind of what you're listening to and what you're absorbing. And you also need, on top, the cherry on top of all that is to apply some self-discipline to go play with this stuff. I went to a hackathon a couple of months ago, and there were no other executives there, which I thought was interesting. And I thought to myself, why not? Why are there no other executives here? Like where is everybody? If we're expecting our teams to figure this stuff out, I got bad news. It's probably not going to work that way. And so I think like there's a bunch of factors in there that we could try to suss out, but it's a lot. It's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, that's interesting that there was no other executives at an event like that. I think, and I don't know, Mark, I feel like there's a real fear. Yes, there's an overwhelm because of the amount of information. And like you said, with the timing, it's so fast and it's so much. Like in a week, in a month, in 3 months, things are going to change and are going to look different. But the reality is that companies and leaders that are not adapting to some level, they're going to fall behind. And like Julie was saying, they're going to be calling companies, or having to rely or pay these huge, extensive invoices because they never sought out information for themselves, or just kind of said, oh, IT's got it. They're going to implement AI. But what are they actually referring to? And I think that there's almost been like this, I don't know, this not willing to take accountability as a leader to self-engage and self-learn. Other than fear and the amount of information that entails, why do you think that is?
That's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things. One is age. I think that the cohort that you're talking about is 55 plus ish, right? To be at that level. Again, we're talking about relatively larger businesses, not solo businesses. Um, I think I'm a little unique. My daughters always make fun of me because I'm the first one to try, TikTok or Sora or whatever. And like I'm a Gen Z, I'm an honorary Gen Z, I guess. Yeah, but I'm firmly Gen X. And so there is fear, but I don't know that it's only fear about like losing a job. I think it's when you get to a certain age, you sort of you calcify a little. And I think it that's unfortunate. And it also sucks the juice. I mean, if you're not really curious, a guy multiple people who I've worked with in the past have said, "Hey, Mark, your superpower is your curiosity." I can't stop. I just like, I'm not seeking. It's like, I just can't help going like, well, what's that all about? What knob can I turn on that? It gets me in trouble, by the way. I mean, curiosity definitely killed the cat. But it also unveils like, oh, what's behind that door? And I think that curiosity about these technologies is crucial today. I think unlike the last, let's say, 20 years, we are actually in a truly transformative moment. I think somebody's told me the other day, this is interesting, I'll run this by you. We hear a lot about disruption, right? People say, oh, this is disruptive. What if the disruption already happened? What if the day that ChatGPT came out, that was the disruption, that was the earthquake? And now we're just living in integration time. And so the question is, how fast can you adapt to a new world? It doesn't matter how good Sora's model is. It doesn't matter that GPT 12 does 18 million more things. If you haven't figured it out by now that the world changed 4 years ago, you're probably on a treadmill that's going to be very difficult to catch up. And frankly, if you look at what's happening with Accenture, they laid off 11,000 people. McKinsey has talked about layoffs. Like all the big consulting firms are also struggling with like, how do we do our thing in this world where we have this sort of like alien intelligence pushing pressure on us? If you believe that we're in a truly transformative moment, that the disruption's already happened, and you're not taking action, that's like tantamount to like, I don't know, what's a bad word I could say? Like you're failing. You're failing, right? But if you don't believe that, that's fine too. That's an okay bet to make. And maybe there's a couple of industries out there. I don't know, food tours. I don't know. I don't know what kind of business. But if you think that your business is not going to be dramatically impacted by these technologies and that you don't have a people change management problem on your hand, I don't think you're looking at it clearly. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think people underestimated. I think people in the beginning, even when ChatGPT came out, people thought this is going to be something trending, something that is not going to impact their daily life. It's going to be like TikTok, you either pick it or you don't. I think people were thinking they had a choice. And I think what people are seeing now is it's infiltrating every area of our life. Your entire livelihood is now being impacted by AI, whether you're aware of it or not. And so, one of the things Taryn and I always talk about is like, I've gone into companies where there's change management, and the first thing they do is like, well, we've been doing this way this whole time. Like, why do we have to change something? Like, how much? Like, if we're going to only get 20% increased productivity or 10%, is it really worth all the money you're investing in? And how do you get a team? How do you get a team to get on board? Because I found that very struggling. And I will be honest with you, Mark, in that season, it wasn't a generational thing. I had a group of people who have been doing the same thing. They're fast at what they do. They're quick at it. They do not see any reason for any type of software update or anything, but the world was changing. We were moving from, getting on your laptop, on your computer, to doing everything on our phone. And so I remember trying to be like, well, we do everything on your phone. I was like, no, I don't. I just call everybody. And so I realized in that moment there was a gap. I'm like, what do you mean? Are you not using apps? So how do we coach a team? How do we coach? And it may not be generational. It could be lots of things there. But how do we coach your team to help bring value to what the change is and what's without overwhelming them with all the change all at once?
Yeah, it's a great question. And culture by culture, company by company will go through this at different phases. Again, we talked about maturity. From a people maturity, one of the core questions is, do we trust each other? Do we actually believe each other, trust each other? And we can disagree, but ultimately, again, super oversimplistic rubric, do we believe that AI is transformative? Again, like we can look to history to sort of ask ourselves some of the questions. There was a time and place, I was in the workforce. I'm old enough to remember no internet, fax machines. Like I used to, like my internship in college, I was like processing fax machines, like faxes, like, oh my God, faxes. My wife took a job a couple years ago and she came home and she was laughing. She's like, you're not going to believe it. There's a team of people that just do faxes. It's a healthcare business. So it's like, oh, so, again, like there was a reason for a fax team. It existed until 2024 at this company. They were late, to be fair, but they finally were like, we should probably do something about this. There was a reason because of the industry, right? The systems hadn't caught up. And so it's going to it's going to vary from industry to industry. The companies I tend to work with and have worked at, again, they sort of recognize, something really big is, when I spent my time in fundraising in nonprofits, it was the shift was on. So, for example, when I took the job at Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, they were doing, I don't remember the exact numbers at this point, it was a while ago, but they were doing somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $8 million digital fundraising per year. The guy who hired me was like, your mission is in 3 years to do 50. I was like, ugh, okay. We did 65. Part of that was luck, right? Part of that was, it was moving from writing checks to using credit cards, right? And now we're in a position where, like, I'm not even sure what you do with cash anymore. Like, if someone hands you $100 of cash, like, you go to some places, they're like, we don't, like, it's credit only. So I think part of what you have to do is sort of calibrate to your industry, the situation you're in as an organization. But you got to trust each other. Like, I think that is the foundational layer. Once you trust each other, you can have hard conversations, right? It's very hard to have a conversation with somebody where you're like, hey, we should use custom GPTs to help us with, editing and copywriting. And the editor goes, okay, well, that's clearly the first step of me losing my job. And in my mind, I said, no, that's actually not what's happening. What's happening is we're trying to remove the mundane stuff, right? Like having a machine check to make sure it's the right format and that case is correct and that there's no spelling mistakes. I don't need to pay you for that. That's a machine job. Now, there's things that I need you to do though, right? Like, could you work with the writers in the case of Third Row Media, because it was a media business? Can you work with the writers to improve the overall quality of the content? Can we, right? Are there things we can do together? Now, you can only do that if you trust each other. If the person on the other side of the line thinks, well, they're just doing this to get rid of me because they want to save money, which, by the way, is one of the other media narratives that we're experiencing. So you sort of can't blame people for thinking that. And it's also true. It's probably going to happen, right? CEOs and boards are going to go, look, if I can improve the bottom line by 8% by getting rid of 20% of the team and not suffering any real impacts, do it. But like, what's the real cost of that is going to be trust. And once that trust is broken, I think now you get in a position, and if you study your history and you look at the history of sort of disruptive technologies and disruptive moments, and you like look at things like Blockbuster and Netflix, and you go, well, what happened there? Well, a lot of things happened there, not least of which one company innovated in a way the other company couldn't follow fast enough. One example. There's a bunch of these examples, and so I think trust is a big part when it comes to leadership. And it's increasingly hard to trust the people in charge. It's just a world that we're in right now. It's a weird space.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mark. And I think that trust is so important, within the team. And I think part of that trust, there has to be uh, clear communication. Julie and I talk so much about communication. And sometimes it's like when there are things that are changing and shifting within a culture, within an organization, when that communication is lacking, it creates this like panic for the team, right? And they're not sure, or there's a new AI tool or something, and they are concerned for their jobs. And so automatically, if that communication isn't there, the productivity level is impacted, great
Yeah.
in a negative way. And so, you know, talk to me a little bit just on based on your experience, previous, but also in your consulting role now. How do you coach, to that point with having communication in order to build trust? What does that look like for the leaders that maybe even struggle a little bit to put enough out there to be transparent enough to build that trust? How do you coach folks that are kind of managing that space?
It's hard because the culture is working against it. But I don't know. Are you guys Brown fans? I know I am. I don't, like
Yeah,
I got to get her new book. I just listened to a podcast with her talking about it. I think a lot of it starts there, like what she talks about in terms of vulnerability and openness. And like, that's why I mentioned this idea of like, I'm at this hackathon. There's no other execs there. My thought was, but if they were there, then they could learn something, but they could also demonstrate, right, to their teams, we're here learning together. This is new transformative technology. There's no experts right now. There's just no experts. And so how do you build trust? Well, you be vulnerable. It's one good lesson, right, that we've all learned from Brene. But then you put your hands in the dirt and you don't sit in the ivory tower. And I think that, you know, let's just say marketing, Taryn, because I know you have a marketing background too. Like the CMOs of the future and the CMOs that are coming up today all know how to do hands-on lead gen, demand gen. They know how to code a website. They know how to make a video or edit a video, right? Like my daughters have a wide range of technical skills that they've built because they grew up in a world where all that stuff existed. If you're not willing to understand how it works, I just don't know how you're going to manage through it, right? I don't know how that's going to happen. And so I think the days of executives not understanding the technology, I like to talk about the scaffolding of technology, like what's behind, what's like we're recording right now digitally through Riverside. But like what's happening behind the scenes, right? Like something's capturing my video and it's like shoving it onto the internet so we can talk to each other in real time. And then later it's going to like save it as a high resolution file that you guys can then pull down and edit. Like there's a scaffold that like you just pick up your phone and you go, how does this thing work? Like you don't have to know how it works, but you have to understand there's something happening behind the scenes that's making it work. And if you're not at least aware of that or curious about that, I just think in this new world, you're going to be lost. Like like if you don't understand how to vibe code a simple app so that you can just sit down on a Sunday and be like, I got to make this thing real quick because I got to get an answer to this question. I just think the future is going to move so quickly. You're just done. I'm betting everything on this. Like I believe that there's a concept called citizen developers. A guy named Scott Brinker, he writes a blog called Chief Martec, talked about years ago. I was with him yesterday. We were talking about this exact thing. And it's this idea of average people can create applications, right? And we're seeing that come to fruition now with Lovable and Replit and all the things, and even video editing. Like look at a platform like Canva turns you into a graphic designer overnight. ChatGPT turns you into, I don't know, a therapist and a copywriter in 2 minutes. Doesn't mean you're good at it, but right, you can demonstrate some of the thinking. And so I think there's something to how you make this transition that is different than previous generations because the technology is radically different. And I would just say, like, if you're a senior exec and you're feeling guilty hearing this, or you're feeling some shame, like you can do something about it. Like open ChatGPT and start asking it questions. What do I need to know about these things? It's not actually that hard if you get curious about it.
Yeah, I love that because you're talking about something that I think is just missing, the curiosity. You have to have a desire to learn and like you said, if you're an exec and you're showing up to that, that space, it's okay to be vulnerable and not know things. There's so much I think in this season that we don't know. And that's okay to admit that, but I think this like old mindset, this old corporate mindset that we've all kind of come from to some extent is we have to know it all, and that's not the case. And I think you said it earlier. It's like you kind of calcify if you're not learning, if you're not being curious. And I really think that that's true.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to our conversation. I would always, when we would get interns for a few months, I would always pick their brain because they're at the forefront of what's going to happen. And so I would be like, hey, we're doing this. Like, but how would you do this? Like, I would really want to know because it's going to tell me where I need to be going and where I need to be looking because it's what's convenient for them. I remember talking to a young person, this is like 10 years ago, and they're like, I don't want to do this. I have to call into a call center. And the thought of that for them was just like absurd. They're like, I'm not calling into a call center and talking to somebody. Why can't I do this on an app? And it was just like, and it might have been 15 years ago, but it was like, hey, like I have to leverage what's happening on the forefront. If I don't understand what's going on, and I think a lot of executives think that puts them, and I think also executives, I've met a couple of them where they're scared to take healthy risk. And I think the healthy risk part of it is like there is this part of failing, but we'll just fail forward. I think I embrace that part of it and be like, hey, we tried this, it didn't work, we failed forward, and be vulnerable in that space. I think people are not always comfortable to be there. If they're not vulnerable in their personal life, I find it hard to believe them being vulnerable in their professional life. And so I think we're seeing that in real time right now because we're seeing some companies just run with it. And we're seeing the difference between them and the people that are just more hesitant because they want to create a false sense of security with their employees.
That's right. Yeah, and the numbers are there to prove it. You don't have to look very far. There's multiple studies done about companies that invest in a certain way. If you look at like customer experience, for example, companies that invest in certain methodologies, technologies, ideations, ideas, process, change management, and kind of get something like customer experience right, quote unquote, right, better than average, gain outsized gains. There was a study I was reading the other day about product management, and the report was looking at retention. I think I'm going to misquote the hell out of it, but it was like it was about product retention. Like, a very, very small slice of companies that sort of got it right get 99%, 90% of the gains. Their average user churn is significantly lower than everybody else's, and so you sort of have to think about. And again, it's like you can look over broader spans of time. Fax machines once were dominant; now they're literally gone. Like, there's an argument to be made. I was debating this with a friend the other day. There's an argument to be made that website user experiences are about to go away forever. Because once you have a chat and a voice experience, what do I need to go learn HubSpot or Marketo or whatever? Like, I don't need to learn all these tools. And we saw a demonstration of this yesterday. You can go into ChatGPT, you can add your Canva account, and you can just say, make me a presentation with this, and it just does it. I don't need to know how to click and drag and select a template. I can just talk to it. So we're entering this really radical moment with this technology that I don't even understand it completely either, but like, I think you have to acknowledge massive changes here. And so the question again becomes, what do you do about it?
Yeah, that's so good. I think we're all in the same place. What do we do now? And I think for you, the way that you're answering that for yourself is kind of taking a step back and doing more of the consulting so you have the space and the time, to be able to dedicate that time into more of that creative, kind of problem solving space. And
Yeah,
we talked about this earlier before we pressed record with our conversation is so oftentimes like we are caught up in the day to day of our work and we don't have the time or the capacity to pursue what those passions are. And you said something earlier, Mark, that I was just like, that's so true. Is most of the time, those passions and the work that we're doing, it's often linked up, but we don't really take time to connect the dots.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, I was telling you the story of this silly little golf show that my buddy and I created, 10 years ago. And the reason I wanted to do it, he had a different reason. The reason I wanted to do it was because I saw what was happening on YouTube. I was like, I need to have the skills so I can guide my teams. Go back to that whole thing we just talked about with AI. So I learned how to shoot video. I learned how to edit video. I learned how to put the bumpers on. I learned how to compress it and what codecs are and how do you upload it to you. Like, I learned all that stuff. And it just happens over and over again. And again, I think this is not 1970, 1980, 1990, even 2000s. This is a moment in time where citizen technology, developer technology is in the hands of all of us. We just have to go grab it. I think that's a fundamental game changer. I'm not suggesting that a CEO of some manufacturing company should necessarily be building apps, but if that person doesn't understand that apps can be built at that speed and that it's actually quite easy, then they're going to end up either overpaying for stuff that doesn't perform the way you want it to, or frankly, they're going to miss the opportunity and their competitors are going to outrun them. And I think that's the real risk at this moment is you're just getting outrun by your competitors.
Yeah, well, I think not only that, but you just made such a good point. It's like if they're not learning it and realizing the quickness and the ease of something, they're going to end up overpaying for it. And it's almost like you can't really get the attention of leaders unless you're translating in that language of it's going to affect your bottom line.
That's right. Because that's all that
Like
matters, right?
it,
Like, at the
it
end of the day,
does.
it's like,
That's
you
when
know,
you get their attention. Like, hello, this is affecting your bottom line. Like, make a change, figure it out. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting a ton of resources.
and that's why, like I say, for me, like the kinds of companies, and I'm one person, and so I'm not planning on building a massive agency. I just want to help a few companies who kind of understand this, right? They're in that same space. Like, we don't necessarily know what to do next, but we believe it. We believe the story. We don't know what to do next. I'm your guy. I'm not, I'm not here to convince somebody who wants to debate me on whether or not AI is transformed technology. Like, I got all the proof I need. I've been around a long time. I've seen it. Like, have a good time, knock yourself out. I'll go work with people who want to. And I think a lot of companies, unfortunately, are going to get sideswiped by what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months. Like, I think we've hit some kind of weird inflection point with these agents. They're very immature. They're not very good right now. They're about to become quite good very quickly. And when you start wiring all this stuff up, I can't even predict what's going to happen. That's part of the problem is like, I don't really know. We're going to have to go invent it together. And again, that's like, put your hands in the dirt, go figure it out.
Yeah, we don't know. I think it's almost like a blessing and a curse because it's like we don't know what we don't know, but we do have to have this mindset of I'm going to figure it out. I want to be a self learner. I want to problem solve. I want to lead better. I want to, create that place of trust and vulnerability for my team. And that takes this willingness to want to learn and to dig in to solve, whether you know it or not, and that's okay. Or it's finding people like yourself that are maybe a little bit further down the path, instead of just staying the same and staying in this
Yeah.
place where you stay stagnant. Because, like you said, I totally agree with you. Over the next 6 months, 12 months, things are going to continue to evolve so quickly that if you're not ready,
Your head's gonna spin.
yeah, your head's gonna spin for real.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I did an interview with my college alumni magazine or whatever, and I didn't know what the headline was going to be. They just interviewed me for like an hour, and then when the article came out, they called me Mary Poppins, and I was like, should I be offended or like honored by that? And I started thinking about it, and I had this conversation this week or last week with somebody who is like a therapist and like a real deep thinker. This guy's unbelievable. And we were talking about this idea of control versus surprise, and how in corporate America today, it's all about control, right? It's all about models and spreadsheets but like, where's room for surprise? Like, honestly, how often are we like, whether we're pleasantly surprised or not pleasantly surprised, but like just allow room for being surprised? And I think this technology is so surprising. And again, if people haven't used Sora or haven't used Lovable or any of them, even ChatGPT, even Copilot, any of them, if they haven't used them more than a cursory level and pushed it a little bit, I think the first thing that happens is you're very surprised. You're like, oh my God, did that thing just do what I think it did? And whether it's good or not isn't the point that I'm making. The point I'm making is we're not in control. The control's gone. Like what's going to happen next? We don't know. I was sitting with somebody yesterday during the OpenAI Dev Day, and we're sort of bracing for like, we kind of know what's going to happen, but like the shape of it, you can't possibly predict. And so we kind of opened ourselves to like, wow, I'm really surprised that it looks that way. I kind of got it right, but like it's the shape of it isn't exactly what I thought. So I think that's the other piece is like, how do we make it okay to be surprised? And how do we, again, it goes back to vulnerability, like, okay, the spreadsheet model, like we had it and it worked for years and now it just doesn't work anymore. It's okay. Like we'll build a new model when we figure it out. And right now though, no one knows what the hell's about to happen. So like, can we embrace that and be okay with that? And it's really, that's a tough one. That's a tough one for a lot of people. A lot of us are major control freaks.
Yeah, I think that's the problem is we're gonna have to be okay with not being able to control everything, and also find the wisdom and the joy along the journey. I mean, that's where we're at in this season of life, and we have to be okay with that. We can't continue to control things, or stay in this spreadsheet life that so many of us knew very well. Well, Mark, I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast on Elements of Culture. It's been a joy having this conversation. Thank you for your sharing your experience, your deep thought, and I'm excited for the things that you'll set your hands to and just the companies that you'll get to partner with.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great to talk to you both. What a fun conversation.
Thank you.